بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي أما بعد فالسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. There's a hadith narrated by Ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anh where he says the first people to declare their Islam publicly in Mecca were 7 people. It was the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It was Abu Bakr, Ammar and his mother Sumayya, Bilal, Miqdad, and Sohaib. And inshallah today we will focus on the life of one of these companions by the name of Sohaib ibn Sinan ibn Malik Ar-Rumi radiallahu anh. And unfortunately, as you can probably assume, this short lecture, it won't do justice to who he was, the life that he lived, the sacrifices that he made for the sake of Islam. But I specifically chose to talk about Sohaib Ar-Rumi radiallahu anh because his life, subhanAllah, is special. His life has so many lessons that we can learn from, and he has such an endearing personality that comes out as you learn about him, as you read about him, read about him in the books, about what made him so loved to the Prophet ﷺ, to the companions, about his journey to Islam, about his character, his charisma, his humor, and specifically his journey, which was so unique. So unique, much like Salman radiallahu anh, in that it brings together what's taking place in the Persian Empire along with the Roman Empire, and then of course what's happening at home, in the home of the Prophet ﷺ in Mecca. In that, Sohaib radiallahu anh, he ties all of those things together, much like Salman radiallahu anh did. But his story is a lot less conventional, if you will. Salman radiallahu anh, we know his starts off at home in the Persian Empire. His father was a leader amongst the Persians. Sohaib ibn Sinan is actually an Arab. And so you wouldn't know that if you read the name Sohaib Ar-Rumi, you would assume that he's a Roman, and we'll talk about later on why that assumption exists. But Sohaib radiallahu anh is actually an Arab, and his father was an Arab named Sinan ibn Malik. And his father was someone who was so intelligent and so advanced that the Persian emperor at the time, Kisra, he appointed Sohaib's father to govern a city on behalf of him for the Persian Empire. So you have an Arab governing a Persian city on behalf of someone who people at the time in the world believed to be the most powerful person alive, the Persian Empire, Kisra. And Sohaib, he is going to grow up in that city. So you have an Arab kid growing up amongst the Persians, and to make it even weirder, Sohaib radiallahu anh, he looked like a Roman kid. So he had white skin, he had blonde hair, and he fit the description of a Roman. So you have an Arab kid who looks like a Roman growing up in Persia. So it gets kind of adventurous, if you will, as you go through his story. So now I'm going to jump to when Sohaib radiallahu anh was 5 years old. When he was 5 years old, his mother had taken him out for a picnic in a city known as Nineveh, where, by the way, where Yunus alayhi salam is from. In Iraq, there was an area by the name of Athani, and Sohaib radiallahu anh and his mother had gone out for a picnic to play. And while they were out, a group of Roman soldiers had attacked that city. And in the process, they took a large number of captives, including Sohaib radiallahu anh and his mother. They were taken back with the Romans from the rule of the Persian Empire. They were kidnapped, taken back with the Romans, and they were put into the slave markets. So you have a 5-year-old kid growing up in Persia, now kidnapped with the Romans, and he looks like a Roman. And when they were taken back, they were put into the slave market. Sohaib radiallahu anh's mother was sold to one slave owner, and he would actually never see her again. And on top of that, he never saw his father again. So now, Sohaib, he was sold to one slave owner, and he would remain in the land of the Romans for about 20 years. And on top of that, he looks like a Roman. So now to add to the story, an Arab kid whose father was a governor in the Persian Empire, kidnapped by Roman soldiers, he would remain as a slave in the Roman territories for about 2 decades. And he says that I would serve with one master and then I would go to another. And now, because he's in the Roman territories and he has all of these Roman attributes already, he starts to pick up on many of the Roman habits, their tendencies. So he learns Greek. And in this process, he completely forgets his Arabic language. So now he's pretty much lost his Arabic identity fully because he doesn't look like a Roman, he doesn't look like an Arab, he doesn't act like an Arab, and now he doesn't speak like an Arab. So Sohaib, he grows up this entire time in Rome. Even though he's lost his Arabic identity, he knows that he's an Arab. He knows deep down in his blood that his father was an Arab, and he has this lineage that traces back to the Arabs. And this entire time while he's in slavery, he constantly longs to be amongst his people. He wants to connect with his roots because he never got the opportunity to do so. So, and now of course, being sold over and over and over again from one slave owner to the next slave owner to the next, now he longs for an ability to connect with his people, so he looks for an opportunity to escape. He looks for an opportunity to escape slavery, and he chooses to head for the land of the Arabs. And he specifically chooses Mecca. And there are two parts of this story why he chooses Mecca. One narration says that he chose to go to Mecca because the church leader at the time, he was talking about the awaited prophet that's going to come to Mecca. And of course, we know in Sham there was a lot of talk about this. So that's one possibility. Some historians also say that it was because Mecca, it was known as a place of asylum. It was known as a place of refuge, a marketplace where people would come in and go, they would pilgrimage. So it was known as a place of asylum, and Sohaib radiallahu anhu, he wanted to treat it as such. So he chooses to go to Mecca. And when he gets there, he's either taken in initially as a slave and purchased, or he's taken in as a halif. It's unclear what the actual story is. But regardless, he ends up under the protection of a man named Abdullah bin Jud'an. Abdullah bin Jud'an, it's important to understand his story. Abdullah bin Jud'an, he was the richest man in Mecca. He was the cousin of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu. He was a person who was well known for his wealth, but he was also well known for his generosity because of his wealth. And he takes Sohaib Ar-Rumi in under his protection. And Abdullah bin Jud'an, he's such a generous man that there was a time in Sham where there was suffering. And the people, they needed some goods, they needed resources, and he sent some 2,000 camels loaded with goods to go and support them. People, they used to get on top of the Kaaba and call the poor to come and take from the provisions of Abdullah bin Jud'an. So he's a very rich man, he's very generous, and he takes in Sohaib Ar-Rumi radiallahu anhu. And the reason I still say Sohaib Ar-Rumi is because now, even though he's in the Arab lands, even though he's amongst his own people, Sohaib, and on top of that, he's learned his Arabic again. But until the day he died, Sohaib radiallahu anhu, he never spoke Arabic like an Arab would. He always spoke with an accent. So he spoke like a Roman spoke Arabic. So now, because of these tendencies that he has, he looks like a Roman, he acts like a Roman, and now he speaks Arabic like a Roman. Even though he's in Arabia, he's amongst his own people, he's still known as Sohaib Ar-Rumi. And Abdullah bin Jud'an, to further go into his story, Hilful Fudul, which would have guaranteed the rights of people like Sohaib, it would have guaranteed protections for people like Sohaib. Hilful Fudul, it took place in the house of Abdullah bin Jud'an. He was the one who finances all of what happens in Hilful Fudul. So he was well known for his generosity, and he takes in Sohaib Ar-Rumi. And despite Sohaib's background, he has a characteristic, he has a personality that is so endearing to Abdullah bin Jud'an, which leads him to turn Sohaib radiallahu anhu into his representative. So he teaches him tricks, he teaches him how to engage with the Arabs, how to make deals in the marketplace. And in this process, Sohaib radiallahu anhu, although he was already extremely smart, although he was already super sharp, he becomes even smarter. He becomes one of the smartest men in the marketplace there because of these skills that he's learned. And in this process, he himself accumulates a large amounts of wealth and becomes one of the richest men in Mecca. Sohaib radiallahu anhu. So you have a Persian kid who was kidnapped by the Romans, a slave for almost 2 decades, and now migrates to Mecca to escape and becomes one of the richest men in Mecca. And the thing with Sohaib radiallahu anhu is he never has anyone to really protect that wealth. Remember, although he's an Arab, he has no lineage in Mecca. He has no tribes there, and Mecca, we know, is a very tribalistic society. So Sohaib radiallahu anhu, he has no one to protect that. His protection at this point, it solely rests in the power of Abdullah bin Jud'an. And granted, he was a very powerful man, so he has protection, but when Abdullah bin Jud'an passes away, Sohaib, he is just left as a rich man in Mecca, nothing much to him. He buys, he sells, he trades, but beyond that, he's nobody, he has no protection, he has no lineage there. So now, did he know the Prophet ﷺ before Islam? There is a narration where he says that I accompanied the Prophet ﷺ. I had been with him, I knew him before revelation had came to him. And this could be in 2 different capacities, either through the house of Abdullah bin Jud'an, who again, Hilful Fudul took place there. And we know the Prophet ﷺ, he was the youngest member of Hilful Fudul, the treaty, the pact that took place. or it was through the marketplace. The marketplace where the Prophet ﷺ, we know he was a merchant, he was in the marketplace, and Sohaib radiallahu anh, now with these skills that he's taken from Abdullah bin Jud'an, he also, he's very active there, he's very sharp of what's happening in the marketplace. So regardless, one of these ways, he's experienced the character of the Prophet ﷺ. Now Sohaib, he hears about the Prophet calling to Islam, the Prophet ﷺ calling to Islam. And he caught on to this because he's deeply perceptive of what's happening in the marketplace around him. Sohaib, as we mentioned, very sharp. When he hears the murmurs of the Prophet's call, it immediately lands in his ears and in his heart. He hears the call before most of Mecca has heard it, and he hears that the Prophet ﷺ is gathering with a small group of people in the house of Al-Arqam to teach them this new religion of his. Now, as far as his previous religious background, Sohaib radiallahu anh, he was in Persia, so he's been exposed to the Zoroastrianism, the fire worshipping of the Persians. And then in Rome, he was there for quite some time, so he's been exposed to their Christianity, the religion of the Byzantines. And now he's been in Mecca for some time, so he's been exposed to the idolatry, the idol worship of the Meccans. And he doesn't have a particular attachment to any of them. He just they're just all there for him. But when he hears the call of the Prophet ﷺ, he's already experienced the nobility of the Prophet ﷺ. He knows that this is someone he can trust. He knows that this is a truthful man. He doesn't speak out of his desires. And he instantly wants to hear what the Prophet ﷺ is talking about. So it lands in his ears and in his heart. Now, this next narration that I'm about to share with you is so beautiful. I want you to kind of imagine the scene that is taking place in front of you. The person that narrates the story of Sohaib's Islam is Ammar ibn Yasir radiallahu anh. He says that I found Sohaib at the door of Al-Arqam. We arrived at the same time where the Prophet ﷺ was inside teaching Islam to the handful of people there with him. So subhanAllah, these two companions who you hear so much about, these two companions early, like they're legends in Islam, right? You hear so much about them, like early on pillars for the Prophet ﷺ in Mecca. Some of the first to publicly declare their Islam. They come to learn about the religion at the same exact time. They literally meet each other at the door. And Ammar, before they go in, Ammar, he says to Sohaib, he's like, what is it that you want? What are you doing here? And rather than responding to him, Sohaib radiallahu anh, he goes, well, what is it that you want? What are you doing here? So they're kind of feeling each other out. They're both wondering if they've heard the same news about the Prophet ﷺ, about his religion, about if he's here in Dar al-Arqam. So Ammar, he says to him that I'm here intending to enter upon Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam and hear what he has to say. Of course, neither of them are Muslim at this point, so they're both interested in the message of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And Sohaib, he says that I'm here for the exact same reason. So they enter, they knock on the door of Al-Arqam, he answers the door, they enter in, the Prophet ﷺ is inside teaching Islam to a few people. And the narration of Ammar, he continues to say, the Prophet ﷺ فَعَرَضَ عَلَيْنَا الْإِسْلَامِ فَأَسْلَمْنَا, that he presented Islam to us and we accepted Islam. So Ammar and Sohaib, they accepted Islam together at the exact same time. These two people that you hear so much about, and they're going to kind of be connected forever. And now we know the stories of Khabbab and Bilal and Sumayya and Yasir and how they were tortured in such unique ways. That the powerful, the elites amongst the Quraysh, they were tortured privately amongst the elites of their own tribes. Now Sohaib, he is a unique situation in himself because remember, he's not from Arabia, he has no lineage, he has no tribe. So who is going to be the one that's gonna torture Sohaib radiallahu anh? He has no master, no protection. Abdullah bin Jud'an at this point has passed away. So Quraysh, they see him specifically as a tempting target. Because remember, Sohaib radiallahu anh at this point, he's one of the richest men in Mecca. So now if they attack him with the anti-Islamic agenda that's going to grow in Mecca against the Prophet ﷺ and his companions, who is going to protect Sohaib radiallahu anh in a society where they wouldn't have done so in the first place? Right? Mecca is extremely tribalistic. Sohaib radiallahu anh, now that he's accepted Islam, and remember, he didn't hide his Islam. He was one of the first to openly declare their Islam. He was very open about it. So now when Quraysh, they hear about it, when they know that he's accepted Islam, they instantly see him as a tempting target. And since he has no tribe there, anyone could go and torture him. And I mean literally anyone. Any one of the elites of Quraysh. It could have been Abu Jahl one day, it could have been Umayyah another day, it did not matter. Any one of them could have gone, tortured Sohaib, they could have picked him out the streets, taken him back with him, and no one would say anything, no one would bat an eye. It would be like nothing happened. And the connection of Ammar and Sohaib is constant because the books of Sirah, they tell us that Ammar and Sohaib, They used to be tortured until they would not even know what they were saying, to a point of literal incoherence. They were beaten to a point of incoherence, tortured, hung out in the burning sun of Arabia, whipped, dehydrated, starved, on the burning sand of Arabia also. Each of them tortured to a point of literal disorientation. And then you find some of the ahadith where the Prophet ﷺ, he's told to abandon this lot which included people like Khabbab and Ammar and Bilal and Sohaib. He's told to abandon this lot. So it was these guys that were the lower class of Mecca. And Sohaib specifically, he wasn't lower because of his wealth. We know he's very wealthy. He's lower because he has no tribe. And there's so he's disregarded from the people of Mecca. And in response to this, there's a beautiful narration from the Prophet ﷺ, from Abi Umama. Though the authenticity of it is questionable, it's in all the books of Seerah because it speaks to something very powerful. That the Prophet ﷺ, he said that the forerunners are four. He says, I am the forerunner amongst the Arabs, Bilal is the forerunner amongst the Abyssinians, Salman is the forerunner amongst the Persians, and Sohaib is the forerunner amongst the Romans. So on one hand, the Prophet ﷺ, he's being told to abandon this lot. And on the other hand, he's saying, how could I ever abandon him? This man is a forerunner of the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That the status that he holds in front of Allah, how could I ever abandon him? I have no right to abandon this man. And now the Prophet ﷺ, he says that he's a forerunner amongst the Romans. So even though again, Sohaib, he's an Arab in his blood, because he lived amongst the Romans, he spent his childhood amongst the Romans, he grew up amongst the Romans, he speaks like a Roman, he looks like a Roman, he acts like a Roman. He essentially, when he accepted Islam, he essentially was a Roman in that essence. So the name fits him as Sohaib Ar-Rumi radiyallahu an, as he embraced Islam under those circumstances. Now, I want to fast forward a little bit for the sake of time. The Hijrah comes. The Prophet ﷺ, he's granted Nusra from the Aus and the Khazraj, and the time to migrate to Medina has come to establish the first Islamic state. And when that time comes, Sohaib radiyallahu an, he was one of those companions that was essentially barred from society. The guards of Quraysh, they kept him locked up this entire time. And he was essentially stopped from being able to make that hijrah alongside the Prophet ﷺ and the companions. So he talks about this. He says that I tried to migrate, but Quraysh, they chained me up and they locked me up. So now while Khabbab is able to roam free, while Bilal is now free, Sohaib, he remains in this state of uncertainty amongst the guards of Quraysh because there's no way to actually free him. Remember, he doesn't belong to a tribe, so you can't just go and purchase his freedom. So he remains in this status of limbo amongst the guards of Quraysh this entire time. So he says more about this. He says, I was held back by Quraysh, and an important part of this story, this entire time he hides his wealth from them. None of the guards of Quraysh, and that's what they're mostly after. They want his wealth, and he's had it hidden this entire time. They don't know where it is. And keep this in the back of your mind. So he says that the guards of Quraysh, they watched me 24/7. I was locked up. It was constant watch for me. I was unable to join the Prophet ﷺ and the companions. And he said when the time of the hijrah came, the companions had gone forth. And when the Prophet ﷺ and Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiyallahu anhu were to make the hijrah, that Sohaib radiyallahu anhu says, I was supposed to be the third amongst them. That I was supposed to accompany the Prophet ﷺ and Abu Bakr on that journey to Medina. And he says that I was supposed to go, but Quraysh, they stopped me, they blocked me again. So he's locked up. And he says that every single Muslim that had intended to make the hijrah to Medina at this time, every single Muslim had left Mecca, except for him. He says, I was locked up, I was stuck in Mecca all by myself, accompanied by the guards of Quraysh, unable to do anything in regards to my situation. Now, remember I've said multiple times that Sohaib radiallahu anh, he's extremely smart, he's very sharp. And he has these unique ways of how he would get himself out of situations. So now, this situation that he's in with the guards of Quraysh, how does he get out of it? He has this unique tactic. He tells the Quraysh, he says one night that he pretended to have stomach issues, that he pretended he had stomach issues, he had diarrhea, that he would stand up and he would sit down and he would hold his stomach. He would walk around, he would go up and down, and he kept on telling the guards of Quraysh that, I gotta go, please let me go, right? So he kept on telling them, I gotta go answer the call of nature. And at one point, he did it so many times in one night that the guards of Quraysh, they just let him go one time. They let him go by himself, they got tired of watching him, and they just let him go. And Sohaib, as soon as he saw that none of the guards of Quraysh were watching him, he says, I pretended to go and use the restroom. and he gathered a few things with him. He gathered a few belongings, and he just took off to Medina. He ran away. Without even thinking about it, he ran away. He didn't look back, and he just bolted. And he says, by the time the guards of Quraysh had realized, I was already advanced somewhat to the outskirts of Mecca. So now he's making his way to Medina. Eventually, of course, the guards of Quraysh, they realize he's been gone too long. So they will go search for him, and they find out he's ran away, and they run after him. Of course, they eventually catch up to him. And when they catch up to him, Sohaib radiallahu anh, he's on top of a hill. And he has just a bow and an arrow with him and just a few belongings. None of his wealth is there. None of his actual belongings are there with him. He just has a few little things, a bow and an arrow, some slight material, stuff like that, right? So when he's on that hill, I want you to imagine this situation. Imagine being locked up this entire time in Mecca. And now this is your first chance at freedom. This is your first chance at being able to roam free. When the guards of Quraysh approach him, Sohaib radiallahu anh, he sees them. He says, Ya Quraysh, you know that I am the most skilled archer from amongst you. And he's pointing his bow and an arrow towards them, and he's threatening them. He says, Wallahi, I will take each and every single one of these arrows, and I will kill each and every single one of you, and you will not arrive at me. So he's threatening them, standing all by himself. Think about the courage that takes being locked up in Mecca amongst these guards for so long. And now he's standing all by himself. And the guards of Quraysh, they see him and they say, Sohaib, you came to us with nothing. You came to us as a slave from Rome with literally nothing. And we took you in. And now over this time, you became so rich. You got all of this wealth because of us. So they're saying that you became wealthy because of the people of Mecca. So you owe all of your wealth to the people of Mecca. And they're saying, now you think we're just going to let you run away with all that money that you made. We're just going to let you take your gold, take your silver, and run away. So Sohaib, in that moment, without even thinking twice about it, no hesitation, he says that if that is your concern, if my wealth is your concern, if that is why you're holding me back, you have no other reason, then you can have all of it. I will tell you where each and every single one of my hiding spots of my wealth are. You can go and collect all of it, but the condition is that you have to let me go to Medina. So he stands there, standing tall, standing firm, on this crave of going to making this hijrah, going to Medina to join the Prophet ﷺ. And he says, I will give you everything that I have, decades of wealth that I worked so hard for when I came from a slave in Rome when I had nothing. I will give you all of it, but you have to let me go to Medina. And they say, you know what, fine, we'll let you go. So Sohaib radiallahu anh, he tells them where all of his wealth is. They go, they collect the wealth, and now finally, after experiencing all this torture, after his slavery in Rome, after his time in Persia, after this long journey, Sohaib radiallahu anh is now finally able to join the companions in the Prophet ﷺ in Medina. So as he's making this journey, as he's making actually before I get there, on this topic of where he gave away all of his wealth, this is where a lot of the Mufassirun say that the verse in Surah Al-Baqarah, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمِنَ النَّاسِ مَنْ يَشْرِي نَفْسَهُ بِتِغَاءَ مَرْضَاتِ اللَّهِ, that those who literally sell themselves for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Sohaib radiallahu anh, again, he gave away decades of his wealth, one of the richest men in Mecca. But he was in a peculiar situation because he craved the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because he wanted to join the Prophet ﷺ and the companions. He gave all of it up without even thinking about it. And now as he's approaching Medina, as he's approaching Quba, the Prophet ﷺ, he sees him coming from a distance, and the companions, they see him coming forward. And they're so overjoyed that finally their brother, their Sohaib radiallahu anh, is finally able to join them in Medina. And Sohaib radiallahu anh, he sees the Prophet ﷺ from a distance. And then the Prophet ﷺ, he sees him coming forward with nothing. None of his wealth is with him. He looks sick, he's dehydrated, he looks starved, he looks injured. And the Prophet ﷺ, he sees him coming forward and he says, رَبِحَ الْبَيْءُ رَبَا يَحْيَا رَبِحَ الْبَيْءُ رَبِحَ الْبَيْءُ. That what a profitable transaction you have made, O Abu Yahya, what a profitable transaction, what a profitable transaction. And this language is so powerful, it's so beautiful, that if you think back to what the Ansar, when they asked the Prophet ﷺ, what are we getting in return for taking you in? What are we getting in return for providing you that nusrah, for providing you support? What are we going to get? And the Prophet ﷺ, he told them, Al-Jannah, you're getting paradise. I'm not promising you victory in battle. I'm not promising you that Yathrib becomes a world-class city. I'm not promising you riches in this world. I'm promising you the greatest reward of all, Al-Jannah. And the Ansar, they said to the Prophet ﷺ, Rabi al-Bay, then this is a transaction that is indeed worth it. This is a profitable transaction. And now the Prophet ﷺ is saying the same exact thing to Sohaib Ar-Rumi, Rabih al-Bay, or Abu Yahya, Rabih al-Bay. Now you can imagine on the day of judgment as Sohaib radiallahu anh is enjoying his Jannah. That Rabih al-Bay, what a profitable transaction, O Abu Yahya, that you have made. What a profitable transaction. Now as he goes forward, and remember he's one of the last to arrive to Medina. And there's a funny narration that takes place, and the reason I bring this up is to again show the relationship that's going to form between Umar bin Khattab radiallahu anh and Sohaib Ar-Rumi. And I'll talk later on more about that. So when he goes forward, Sohaib radiallahu anh, he says that I arrived to Quba from the Hijrah. I was hungry, I was sick, I was tired. His eyes were so inflamed that one of his eyes was completely shut. He looked so sick. And he arrives to the Prophet ﷺ, and the Prophet, he says to Sohaib radiallahu anh, he says, you look hungry, come on and eat. So the Prophet ﷺ, he had some dates and some bread in front of him. And Sohaib radiallahu anh, he went and he started to eat. And he says that I just started to dig into the food. I started to eat like I was crazy. I forgot who I was. I forgot who I was with, where everyone who was around me. I just started to shove food down my mouth. I was eating like I was crazy. So Umar radiallahu anh, he kind of picks on him for a little bit, about this for a little bit. He says, O Messenger of Allah, do you not see how Sohaib is eating like a madman, even though he's got that inflammation in his eye, even though he's sick? And in response to this, the Messenger ﷺ, he says to Sohaib, well, what are you doing? You're sick. You're eating like you're crazy. And Sohaib, he says to Sohaib, he says, you had that inflammation in your eye. You calm down a little bit, right? And he says to the Prophet ﷺ, he says, don't worry about it. I'm eating from the direction of the other eye. This eye is fine. I know this eye is bad, but this eye is fine. I'm eating from this side. So they all it was a funny moment for the Prophet ﷺ and the companions. They all laughed when they saw Sohaib radiallahu anh in this situation. They're all overjoyed that now he's finally joined them in Medina. And again, you see the relationship that's forming between Umar bin Khattab and Sohaib Ar-Rumi radiallahu anh. And we'll talk about that later on, inshallah. But before I get there, our Sohaib radiallahu anh, he has a narration where he says that in Medina, there was not a single battle of the Prophet ﷺ that I was not by his side. I was with him, I was in front of him, I was behind him, I was to his left, I was to his right, I was there in every single battle of the Prophet ﷺ. And I want you to think back to when Sohaib radiallahu anh is on that hill, when he has a decision to make. Am I going to give up all of my wealth? Or am I going to and run to Medina, or am I going to let the Quraysh get to me again? And he gives up all of his wealth without even thinking about it. For what? To stand in battle next to the Prophet ﷺ in Medina. This is why he gave up all of his wealth, that his love for this deen, his love for the Prophet ﷺ, his desire for the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that alone was enough for him to give up everything that he had to Quraysh for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He didn't give it all up because he wanted to. He didn't give it up because he saw a greater opportunity to earn more wealth in Medina. He gave it up simply because it was the only choice that he had in order to attain the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And again, to show the transaction that he made both in this life and in the next life, his status in this world. I want to fast forward to the conquest of Mecca, to Fatih Mecca. There was a comment that was made to Abu Sufyan, that verily the swords of Allah did not reach the neck of the enemy of Allah as they should have. And this was said by Salman, Bilal, and Sohaib radiallahu anh. And of course, at the time, Abu Bakr, he went to these guys, or he went to these companions, and he admonished them for saying that. He's like, you shouldn't have said that to him. And the Prophet ﷺ, when he found out about this, he told Abu Bakr that you should not have admonished them for saying that, because it might be that you have angered them, and so you would have angered Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The status of Sohaib radiallahu anh and Bilal and Salman, of course, also, but to focus on Sohaib, that Rabih al-Bay wa Aba Yahya, that the status that he has now, if you anger him in this world, you anger the Lord of the heavens and the earth. You anger Sohaib, you anger Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is the status that he has now attained. And Abu Bakr then, of course, he went to them and he apologized, and of course they forgave him. So now I want to touch more about this relationship between Umar radiallahu anh and Sohaib radiallahu anh, because it's important for a few reasons. It's important to see how Islam, it turned these people into brothers across race, across class, across journey, and most importantly across their tribe, where they came from. And Umar radiallahu anh, how he viewed Sohaib radiallahu anh, how perfect of a man he saw Sohaib. He says, what a man that you are. Had it not been for these three things, I see no flaws in you. And before I mention these three things, I want you to pay attention to how almost irrelevant they are to who Sohaib radiallahu anh is. Not to say that the words of Umar bin Khattab are irrelevant, but to just pick up on how he's almost joking with him. He says, number one, that you have taken the kunya of Abu Yahya and you don't have a son named Yahya, so I don't know why you're called Abu Yahya. And he says, number two, that you ascribe yourself to the Arabs, but you're not from Arabia, you're from Rome. And he says, number three, that you are very extravagant in your purchasing of food and the way that you eat food. And these three things, these are the only three things that Umar bin Khattab sees as a flaw in who Sohaib radiallahu anh is as a person. And of course, Sohaib radiallahu anh responds to him by saying, as for the kunya of Abu Yahya, this is what the Prophet ﷺ called me, so I embraced it. And he says, number two, for my ascription to the Arabs is because in my blood I'm an Arab, my father was an Arab, and he tells him about his lineage. And number three, he says, as for my extravagance in my food, he says, I heard the Prophet ﷺ say that the best of you are those that feed many people. So Sohaib, he had tendencies of buying lots of food and feeding the poor and feeding people, whether it was to actually feed the poor, to just keep people together. And think back to now the incident that took place with the food when Sohaib first arrived in Medina, right? But again, these three, I mentioned this because it shows in the virtue of Sohaib radiallahu anh. Also, it shows in the relationship between these two people, but the status of Sohaib and who he is as a person, his character, his personality. And to further show his virtue, his status, that when Umar bin Khattab, when he was attacked, when he was wounded, when he was on his deathbed, he of course, we know he lived some time because of just how powerful he was, how strong he was. That he was still able to give some last minute orders, last minute instructions. So in this time, we know he's not fit to be the Khalifa anymore. So he has to appoint people in certain positions to govern the affairs of the Muslims while the Shura settles on eventually Uthman radiallahu anh. So in this time, one of the positions that he has to appoint someone to is who's going to be the Imam of the Muslims. Who's going to lead the Muslims in their salah. And the person that he chooses amongst all of those companions there with him, all those companions there are with him, and he chooses Sohaib radiallahu anh specifically. And this is huge for many reasons. Because number one, it speaks to the virtue of Sohaib, right? In the presence, again, of all of those companions, Umar bin Khattab radiallahu anh, he specifically chooses Sohaib. And number two, Sohaib, remember, as I mentioned, the way he spoke Arabic was not how an Arab spoke. He spoke with a Roman accent. So now, both despite his foreignness, both in the way he looks, how he acts. Remember, he has white skin, he has blonde hair, he doesn't look like an Arab, he doesn't act like an Arab, he doesn't speak like an Arab, and he has no tribe in Arabia to ascribe himself to. Umar bin Khattab still appoints him specifically to lead to be the Imam of the Muslims, to lead them in Salah. This is one of the great virtues of Sohaib radiallahu anh, and it speaks to the culture that Islam created. That how it completely, especially Umar bin Khattab, who we saw was completely transformed by Islam. His outlooks on the world, specifically his tribal outlooks on the world, with Islam, how it was changed, and it shows itself in Sohaib being appointed as the Imam in his absence. Now I want to pause here for a second, and I want you to compare that to what we see today. Compare that to the rottenness of the nationalism that we see around the Muslim world today. Muslims today, from across the world, from Algeria to Pakistan to Turkey to every single land of Muslims, you see them rising, brothers in faith, rising to go and literally go to Gaza and break the siege on Gaza, to get food, water, medicine, and just basic resources in. We've all seen it. We've seen the flotilla. We've seen the trucks that are going. We've seen the doctors that are trying to get in. And who's stopping them? Who is blocking them? Who is the ones that are in their way? You see them going to the Egyptian, they're at the border in Egypt, they're at the Rafah crossing, who's stopping them? It's not the Zionist tanks, it's not American drones, it's the Muslims themselves. It's the Egyptian army themselves that is stopping Muslims from going across into Gaza and get just basic necessities, basic foods and waters. It's Egyptians, Jordans, and the rest of the countries, they're all in it. And they're blocking the ones that are coming to help them because the ones that are going are from the wrong side of a border that was drawn by colonial powers years ago. This is not Islam. This is not the relationship that we see between Umar and Sohaib. This is not the rottenness of the nationalism that the Prophet ﷺ warned us about. Compare that to the relationship between Umar ibn Khattab and Sohaib Ar-Rumi, someone who before Islam was the worst of the worst in society. Umar ibn Khattab, a noble from Quraysh, one of the worst in society, and a Roman slave who had nothing. Nationalism today, in today's world, it would have separated them by every possible category you can think of. By their race, by where they came from, their status, their wealth, their language, their citizenship, any possible border you can think of between two people, it would have stopped them today. But not in Islam, not amongst the companions and the Prophet ﷺ. When Umar radiallahu anh was on his deathbed, he appointed Sohaib radiallahu anh. He didn't appoint someone from Quraysh. He didn't appoint an Arab. He didn't appoint someone from his lineage. He appointed a Roman slave who came to Arabia. He appointed Sohaib radiallahu anh. Not because in Islam, your tribe or where you're from, that's not what raises you, it's your taqwa. Your taqwa in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that's what raises your status. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He doesn't raise people by their tribe, He raises them, He raises men by truth. Imagine if Umar ibn Khattab, he had told Sohaib Ar-Rumi that you can't lead salah, you're not an Arab, you're not from Quraysh. Imagine if he had said that to him. But no, Islam, it erased all of those labels. Because that's the unity that Islam creates. And that's the unity that nationalism has destroyed today. If we want to break the siege onto Gaza, if we want to be the ones to end the oppression all across the world, then we must return to this relationship between Sohaib and Umar, where borders mean nothing and brotherhood means everything. And now to continue with the relationship between these two, to further show the love that they had for each other. We see that when Umar radiallahu anhu was appointed, Sohaib, he wept out loud. He was crying so loud in the presence of Umar bin Khattab. He was saying, "Oh my brother, my brother." The affection that he had, he's saying, "Oh my brother is dying." And Umar bin Khattab, in this moment, he tells Sohaib radiallahu anhu, he says, "Don't you know that the Prophet ﷺ said that the dead is punished by the mourning of the living?" So he told Sohaib radiallahu anhu to tone down his crying, to quiet down a little bit, man. So it shows the relationship that they had, the love that they had for each other, the affection that they had. And what an honor that Sohaib radiallahu anhu was the one to jump into the grave of Umar bin Khattab, to receive his body, to plant him next to the Prophet ﷺ and Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu. That in itself is an incredible honor that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bestowed Sohaib Ar-Rumi with. Now, he would live some time into the Khilafah of Uthman radiallahu anhu, and when the fitna broke out, when the trials and tribulations broke out amongst the companions, Sohaib was one of those people that completely, he wanted to avoid it. So he took to the mountains, he purchased his sheep, and he wanted nothing to do with the internal disputes, the trials and the tribulations of the Muslims. So he died in a relatively obscure way, despite his lofty status. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala be pleased with him for the wonderful personality, the journey of this man who again was one of the first to publicize Islam. Now, he was married one time and he had a few children. And that's where you find some of the narrations of his hadith. Because he died at a relatively younger age, he didn't have time, he didn't have the ability to transmit some of the narrations of the Prophet ﷺ. But the ones that he did transmit are so powerful. They leave such a lasting impact that I found one of the most famous ahadith of the Prophet ﷺ in regards to trials and tribulations is narrated by Sohaib Ar-Rumi radiallahu anhu. And the hadith, the Prophet ﷺ, he said, "How wonderful is the affair of the believer. There is good for him in everything that happens to him." And this is only the affair of the believer. This is only the case of the believer. If good comes to him, if prosperity comes to him, then he is grateful, and that is better for him. But if hardship comes to him, if difficulties comes to him, then he is patient, and that is better for him. So this very famous hadith that I'm sure we've all heard, this very famous hadith is narrated by Sohaib Ar-Rumi radiallahu anh. And think about how this applies to him. Think about all of what happened to Sohaib in his pursuit of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Messenger of sallallahu that Rabi halbay Rabba Yahya, what a profitable transaction you made in the process of coming to Allah. And in the process of giving up all of your wealth and not thinking about the consequences of any of it. And I want to talk about this hadith for a second. This hadith, it's not just a saying narrated by Sohaib radiallahu anh on behalf of the Prophet sallallahu. This hadith, it creates a lens a lens through which me and you Muslims today must view the Ummah through. When we see what is happening to our Ummah on a daily basis, whether it be in Gaza, whether it be in Sudan, whether it be in Yemen, in Kashmir, in Syria, in East Turkestan, the list goes on and on and on. Despite the occupation, despite the loss of family, despite the beatdown, despite the siege upon every literal aspect of life, their response is patience, their response is faith, their response is resilience. You hear as parents see their children launch hundreds of feet in the air because of the intensity of the bombings, you hear them say Alhamdulillah. You hear a doctor who loses 9 of her children while she's working, you hear her say Hasbunallah wa ni'mal wakeel. Think about the taqwa that takes. Think about the strength that takes. And they are a living embodiment of what this hadith is saying, that a believer in hardships they are patient and that is better for them. In hardships they are patient and that is better for them. But at the same time, this hadith, it holds a mirror to me and you. A mirror to Muslims in relative lands of peace and privilege. Lands of relative freedom. That when our test is not patience in hardship, our test is gratitude and ease. And at the same time, that gratitude, it must manifest something in you. It must manifest something in all of us. It must mold us into something, into true Islamic characters, Islamic personalities of courage, of honor, of resilience, of dignity, of strength, and of action. Action through dua, action through advocacy, action through support, and most importantly, action through working towards the protection, the sanctities, the honor, and the blood of Muslims all across the world. To remain idle in a situation like this, while our brothers and sisters are tested day and night, is to misunderstand the blessings of ease and the responsibility that it carries for us. The responsibility is on my shoulder and your shoulder. The same way that when Sohaib Ar-Rumi radiallahu anh, he didn't think about the consequences of giving away all of his gold. He didn't think, oh, where am I going to get my living from? Where am I going to get food from? Where am I going to provide for myself? He didn't think about that. He gave away all of it. When he ran to Medina, he knew the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala awaited him. There was no need for him to think twice. That alone was enough, the pleasure of Allah. We must also have that same mentality. That when we see what is happening to our ummah on a daily basis, don't think about the consequences of your actions. Don't think about what's going to happen to me if I say something. Be the voices of this ummah at a time when many refuse to be that voice. At a time when many fear to be that voice. At a time when many are prevented from using their voice. Be that voice. Be a sword for this ummah. Use your voice as a sword for this ummah. And walk on the footsteps of the Prophet ﷺ, on the footsteps of Sohaib Ar-Rumi radiallahu anh and the rest of the companions. Like it was for Sohaib, the pleasure of Allah is waiting all of us. It's awaiting us, but we have to be the ones to take that first step. We have to be the ones willing to let go of this dunya like Sohaib radiallahu anh did. So don't think about losing a job. Don't think about losing your education. Don't even think about losing a family member. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that provides all of that. He is the one that provides your job. He is the one that provides your education. He is the one that provides your family. He is the one that provides your living. So think about the one that provides. Don't think about these intimidation tactics that the West uses. Think about the one that provides all of your life, all of your wealth, your education, everywhere that's going to happen to you today, anything that's going to happen to you today, what's going to happen to you tomorrow, and what's going to happen to you till the day of judgment. Think about the one that controls all of that and chase His subhanahu wa ta'ala's pleasure. Like it was for Sohaib, or like he was on that hill, me and you, we have a decision to make. We have a decision to make. Which way are we going to go? Are we going to be, when the guards of Quraysh, or in this case, when the Western media, when the Western tactics, when the Western intimidation comes to us, what decision are we going to make? What path are we going to go on? Are we going to be from those who choose this dunya, who choose our wealth, who choose our job, who choose our education over the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Or are we going to be from those who give up this dunya, who give up everything that this dunya might have to offer for a much greater reward, for a much greater transaction? Rabih al-bay that Sohaib radiallahu anh made. What a transaction. Are we going to be from those that make that transaction? Are we going to be those that think about our akhirah? Now, another famous hadith, and I'll end with this inshallah. It's narrated from Sohaib radiallahu anh that he heard the Prophet ﷺ reciting the verse, لِلَّذِينَ أَحْسَنُوا الْحُسْنَى وَالزِّيَادَةِ. That for those that have done good in this life, those that have put forth excellence is an excellent reward in return and more. And the Prophet ﷺ, he said, when the people of Jannah enter into Jannah and the people of fire enter into the fire, a caller will cry out and he will say, "O people of Jannah, you have a covenant with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He wishes to fulfill." And they will say, "Well, what is it now? Now what is it? Hasn't Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala already made our deeds heavy, our good deeds heavy? Hasn't He already accepted us into His paradise? Hasn't He already protected us from the hellfire?" And they would say, the Prophet ﷺ, he said that the veil will be lifted and they will be able to gaze upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the Prophet ﷺ, he says, "I swear by Allah, wallahi, that Allah will not give them anything that is more beloved to them or more pleasing to them than being able to look at Him subhanahu wa ta'ala." So the more in this ayah, لِلَّذِينَ أَحْسَنُوا الْحُسْنَى وَزِيَادَةً, the more, what is more than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala repaying us with Jannah is being able to gaze upon Him subhanahu wa ta'ala. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow us to be amongst those who see His veil lifted on that day. Allow us to be the ones that enter into His paradise. May He grant us hearts that are sincere, like Sohaib Ar-Rumi radiallahu anhu. May He allow us to be those who choose the pleasures of our Lord over the comforts of this world, like Sohaib Ar-Rumi radiallahu anhu. May we be willing to make sacrifices for His deen, like Sohaib Ar-Rumi radiallahu anhu. To give without condition, to act without hesitation, and to stand firm without fear, like Sohaib Ar-Rumi radiallahu anhu. May our actions be marked by sincerity, our footsteps be guided by wisdom, and may we walk amongst the people of Jannah with joy in our hearts, lights on our faces, until we are granted the greatest reward of all. Ameen ya Rabbil Alameen. Assalamu Alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.